Yeah, I'm a professor, I'm a researcher in Argentina. I never know if I have to say Argentina in English or Argentina, how we say it. And, as I was presented, I work as a researcher, as a professor. That's my job. And I've been an activist in several issues. This is one of the things that we are getting on this past few years. So this is something that I wanted to share with you. First of all, I'm going to make a brief presentation of general ideas around this issue, and then I'm going to go deeper into the question of Marxian dependency theory, trying to use it to explain a few things that I think are important in connection with the question of extractivism and new developmentalism, new forms of capitalism in this green era. Well, the PPT was changed because of that. When I exported it, something changed, so we tried to make it better. So the first thing I want to share with you is the idea that in Argentina, for many years now, for almost a decade and a half, there's been a dominant project of what we call there neo-developmentalism, that is a form of what in the global north, as it's known, are forms of state capitalism or state developmentalism, stuff like that. But there we use the word neo-developmentalism because it refers to the idea that the state is in the middle of the scene, trying to promote capitalist development, and it goes back to the 1950s and 60s, and in the early 2000s, this development strategy began again to gain strength. But in the last few years, in the middle of a very deep crisis of Argentina's capitalism, developmentalists try to use as a form of green capitalism, a form of extractivist agenda, to try to sort out this crisis, to try to regain economic growth. We had for more than 10 years, Argentina has been like stagnant in terms of economic growth. Inflation has been going up, wages and labor conditions have been going down. So we have a very big problem in terms of the way capitalism should work as such. So the idea that the new green agenda of developmentalism is very closely related to the Green New Deals in the North. And as I said there, it tries to promote new investments by capitalist corporations, imperialist corporations in different areas. And it's been, of course, attacking different resistances everywhere in the country. There are many projects that are trying to be implemented at this time. I'm going to show you a few of them in later slides. But it's important, a concept that comes from Marxian dependency theory that I want to go into explain later is the idea of superexploitation. Superexploitation of nature. This is the form of extractivism of nature, on nature, not just using resources, but using them at a rate that cannot be reproduced in general terms. And it's important to understand that at least for Argentina and for other countries in the region, these alternatives are meant to, at least for the hegemonic, the dominant fractions of capital, are meant to sort out the question of external constraint, the fact that we need a large number of dollars of hard currency to finance capital flight, to pay for our foreign debt, which is both illegal and illegitimate in several ways. And also, Argentina needs to grow, needs a lot of dollars to finance conspicuous consumption by dominant classes of the economy. Argentina is a dependent economy, and I will say a little bit more after, in a few minutes. But as a dependent economy, one of the main characters is that dominant classes try to imitate. We are living in the southernmost downward part of South America. The dominant classes in Argentina try to imitate the consumption patterns in the north, and doing so, they consume lots and lots of hard currency that we don't have. So that's an issue that the green developmentalist alternatives try to also sort out. As we all know, both these projects, of course, destroy and pillage nature and labor in labor in both productive and unproductive, and so-called unproductive labor, and actually care and reproductive labor, whether it is paid or unpaid. And in a way, and that's something that maybe we should discuss, they appear to be trying to foster what is being called recently the imperial mode of living. And I think there is some contradictions there in that idea, but I put it there just to make the point. Of course, these alternatives, what they are doing is destroying the communities, destroying the territories in different ways. And one thing that is very important for me to understand this issue is that these projects are all very, very authoritarian in different ways, because they destroy, they devalorize, they devalue the way of living of populations all around the country, all around the territories. They not only they destroy their way of living, but they deny the possibility of us having a different way of living, of deciding how do we want to live besides what imperialist capitalist corporations try to propose. And so the final sentence there is important in the way I understand this problem. Capitalists try to create the conditions for the sustainability, the reproduction of the conditions for their self-expansion, but at the same time, in doing so, they are creating the conditions for our lives and sustainability. And this goes on, this goes in the same way with capitalist investments, but also with the need to pay for external debt. Everything is organized to create the conditions for our lives to be unsustainable. And this is an important issue. I think this is something that is an important concept. There are several limits, I think, to these projects, these initiatives, and I stated a few of them. The main one is the one that Marxian dependency theory tries to address, mainly. That is that these initiatives, these neo-developmentalist initiatives, these green neo-developmentalist initiatives, tend to ignore the idea of structural dependency, the idea that dependent economies, peripheral economies, are tied to the north, are tied to the core economies in a particular way, so that what is happening is that for the north to develop in a way they want to develop, our countries, our territories have to suffer. And that's a structural relationship that we need to address, and we need to understand that there is there. It's not casual that transnational corporations go to these countries, go to our countries, and exploit our resources, exploit our labor, different forms of labor, to promote green capitalism or whatever alternative here in the north. This is very important. Of course, there is a question of racialization. Our peoples, our communities are being racialized by these initiatives because we are seen as inferior in different ways. And this is also very important. The lives of people in independent economies appear to within these large initiatives as something to be not very important. I put there Larry Summers was the president of the World Bank in 1991, and he expresses this idea very clearly like 30 years ago, saying that, well, since people in the South, independent economies, are not economically very valuable, it is okay to send them the pollution, to extract their resources, to make their life hell, so that to sell toxic waste there, so that we in the North, in the core economies, can live a greener future. As a third idea that is also very important, I mean, many of these things we have been discussing yesterday morning, during the day. The idea of mercantilization, of commodification of nature, this is also very important. But for several reasons that we have already discussed. The idea that, this was also discussed yesterday, the idea that technological solutions are solutions to these issues, and we know that this is not a problem of just technology, it's a political issue more than a technological issue. And of course, the last question is the role of the state, which is a capitalist state, a state within capitalism. And the state within capitalism remains at the center of this transition that we are trying, that dominant fractions of capital in Argentina are trying to impose. And in these transitions, transformative practice from below, from people organized in different ways, are not considered as relevant. And this is also very important in dependent economies, in peripheral economies, and also here in the core, of course. Well, this was a brief presentation of the general idea. Marxian dependency theory is a theory that came about in the 1960s, around the 1960s in Latin America, as in contradiction, you might say, with what's called structuralism, developmentalism, that came from the ECLAC, the United Nations Committee for Development in Latin America. Raúl Prebisch, an Argentinian scholar, was the first president of the ECLAC, of CEPAL in Spanish. And the discussion that Marxian dependency theory brought about came from the new struggles, a new wave of struggles in Latin America, which was part of the cycle of struggles around the world in the 1960s. Latin America was not separated from the rest of the world. That's a very important issue for me, to understand that most of the most important theoretical developments that we can make, the most related to critical thinking, comes from struggles. I mean, we have to engage in these struggles, and from there we have to pick up the ideas that are important in theoretical terms. It's not just that we sit in a room, in a desk, and we can find the ideas just reading and sitting there. We have to engage in those struggles, and those struggles provide us with important issues to develop them. As I said here, well, this wave of struggles included the Cuban Revolution, the crisis in real socialism everywhere in the world, and a new wave of struggles for independence, especially in Asia and Africa. And all of these struggles in different places, there is Ernesto Che Guevara, the Argentinian, with Fidel Castro, protests in the United States against the Vietnam War. Cordobazo was an uprising of people against the dictatorship in 1969 in Argentina, very much connected with the struggles in Europe in 68, 69, and so forth. And Marxian dependency theory came about. When I say Marxian or Marxist dependency theory, is part of a greater number of discussions relating to dependency in general. I tend to agree more with the Marxian strand of this theory, of which Rui Mauro Marini is one of the most important promoters. Also, Vania Bambirra and Teotonio dos Santos. They died. Vania died a couple of years ago, and Teotonio also. Marini died in the 1990s. This is important, I guess, for you, because most of the works on Marxian dependency theory and on other issues relating to that, which is, for example, unequal exchange, have not been translated into English, for example, or in any case, most of other languages. But last year, the most important work of Mauro Marini was translated into English 50 years after it was published in Spanish. So well, but now you can read it in English at least, if you don't know Spanish, which is important, I think, for these discussions. Some of the key elements of the Marxian dependency theory, as explained by Marini, the concept of superexploitation of labor, which is not just the idea of people having low wages in dependent economies, but it's the idea, I'm not going to go very deep into that, but it's the idea that people in a large number of workers in dependent economies receive wages that are below what they need to reproduce themselves as it could be done in those economies. So there are people that live in shanty towns, lots of them, people that have very poor health, very poor education, lots of difficulties to pay for the traveling to work, etc. They live very badly, even if the conditions of the economy, of a dependent economy, could allow for a different way of living, even within capitalism. It's a particular form of capitalism that needs superexploitation of labor for a sizable part of their working population to compensate for the second thing, that is the unequal exchange of value between capitalism in peripheral economies and core economies. Capitals in dependent economies tend to lose a lot of value in this relationship of unequal exchange. To compensate for that, capitalist corporations use different forms of superexploitation of labor, and I add, just to think about the issues that we're discussing today, they use also forms of superexploitation of nature, which is, this Marini didn't say that, but I've been using this idea, at least this, to think for a few years now. So the question is that superexploitation of labor tends to fracture consumption markets, and then you have a very small consumption market for most of the people, together with a sizable consumption market for this conspicuous consumption of dominant classes. And this is a particular characteristic of dependent economies. Inequality is very, very high, especially in Latin America, but not only. Latin America is the most, I think, if I'm not correct, I'm not wrong, Latin America is the most unequal region in the world in these terms. Brazil, Argentina. And all of this creates a growing pressure to export commodities at an increasing rate for different reasons. But one of them is this: the capitalism to grow in these conditions increasingly needs the exportation of something that we can do with its commodities, with its primary commodities in general terms, things that we can extract. So, so then the idea of superexploitation of labor and nature is very, very important. It's particularly in Argentina. Since the mid-90s, what we had in Argentina is what we can call the expansion of the frontiers of capital. Capital advancing in places where it had never been there. I mean, Argentina is a capitalist country, so capitalism is everywhere, of course. But there are places where capitalism was not developed so much, and nowadays, in the last 10, 20 years, this has increased a lot. So there are new forms of appropriation, as I say, of superexploitation of labor and nature, and we see here some of the forms of this superexploitation and appropriation. Yesterday, one of the presenters talked about, at the end, talked about the question of lithium. Up there, you can see in the corner between the northwest of Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile, there's the triangle of lithium, which has like one of the most important reserves of lithium in the world. Chile has for many, many years extracted that lithium. Bolivia has just recently done so, and Argentina is beginning to do so, and is part of the project today to continue expanding lithium. Lithium in those places comes about salty water, which requires to be extracted, which requires to extract the water from this salty water, from this salt that has lithium in it. The question there, the problem there is that you have to extract all the water in the region, and people living there, which are regions that have little water, are having greater and greater problems to survive because of the increasingly lacking of water. And this is going to increase if extraction of lithium advances. As I said there, well, the superexploitation of productive labor, which is important, is usually seen as labor which is male, adult, and white. But at the same time, superexploitation of this kind of labor, productive labor, labor in factories, for example, increases. This also increases what we can call, and this is another discussion that I'll be having with some other colleagues and people. At the same time, we can see the increasingly the superexploitation of care and reproductive labor in forms which is not directly waged, but usually unwaged, and is also, in general terms, within what is called in Argentina the popular economy, the informal economy, which is mostly female, young, and migrant in general terms. The idea of superexploitation of nature in this context is appropriate, I think, and it relates to the idea of plundering or the ideas that David Harvey has explained as. But plundering, I think it's interesting because it relates to the concept of saqueo in Spanish, which is like that. It's taking things without paying for anything and destroying everything and just it. And this is a very interesting concept and idea. As I said before, all of this is being done in part to pay for foreign debt, which is the cost of the problem and the excuse to continue with this. And the IMF's structural adjustment programs are part of this question. Down here, we can see a region of the country in the center-south of the country, which is called Vaca Muerta. Vaca Muerta is dead cow, because apparently the area in yellow has the form of the face of a dead cow, apparently. And it's a place where they are extracting oil and gas from shale deposits. And it's also, luckily or unluckily, I mean, bad luck, I think, it's also one of the main deposits of shale gas in the world, third or fourth in the world, which is also, it could be a problem. It is a problem because there are many corporations coming in there together with the nationalized YPF Corporation, National Petroleum Corporation, state corporation. They are coming in here to extract oil and gas, especially gas. Gas has to be transported from Neuquén, which is the area there, one of the main cities there, by tubes to the shore to be exported eventually to Europe. Germany, which is trying to connect ties there to receive our gas in liquid form. So again, both lithium and gas are being extracted increasingly to be exported, to be transported as such, without any processing, anything else, mainly to Europe and part of it to China also. Well, there's a problem there. But then the question then is that dependency is not just, as Marini explained, a question of the unequal exchange of value, capitalist value, but also the unequal exchange of common goods, mineral waters, and everything else that is contained in this extractivism. One of the issues also important in relation with extractivism is the question of ground rent, because many of these activities allow these enterprises to accrue ground rent, to appropriate ground rent, and that puts pressure on every other activity in the region, in the country, relating to other industrial activities. It increases the price of land in the region where these activities are taking place. It can increase the price of land, and thus then the price of food in the country. It can force people to move away because they cannot pay the rent. They cannot pay the rent for the land that they used to grow food, etc. So the question of rent, it's also a very important issue related to extractivism. That sometimes it's forgotten, but I think it's part of the debate that we need to have. And well, as I said before, there are many forms of violence that relate to these projects, and well, we all know that. This project, in general terms, have to do, as I said, with gas, lithium. There are some projects, some initiatives relating to the production of hydrogen. As I call them, green hydrogen, which is, of course, not green, because to produce that, you need energy, electric energy that you have to produce somewhere else. And in Argentina, most electric energy comes from nuclear power or the consumption of gas and oil and other stuff. And as I said, well, much of this production goes to Europe, Germany in particular, China. And as I said before, it is very important to understand, at least for me, that these projects imply the prosecution, the repression, and the crucifixion in the media of people that are against it. They're called, they are put as the ones that don't want development, that they don't want things to improve, that are against science, against everything. So I think that's an important issue. Well, as I said before, the imperialist mode of living is a contradictory, or it's a concept that is problematic because, we are not, Argentina at least, is not becoming, we are not living increasingly as people live here in the core. Here, not here, in the core of the core. But on the contrary, we are like the flip side of the coin. People on the core live in their imperial mode of living, and we are like living in a hell on earth. increasingly worse. I mean, the concept is not totally correct, I think. As I said, in different projects, including soya production, which is from the 1990s, it's been an important extractivist production in Argentina. As you see there are several corporations, Chevron in the extraction of gas and oil in Vaca Muerta since 10 or 15 years ago. Other corporations from China and car corporations are related to the projects of extraction of lithium in the north. BMW and Chinese corporations that produce cars, etc., they all want the lithium to produce the batteries. And as Bogdan said recently, in December, in the midst of this process of huge crisis of Argentina's capitalism, we have a new experimental president, I guess, which is, they call themselves anarcho-capitalisms. Sometimes they appear to be called, they are called paleo-libertarians, because they are like, they believe they can create like a capitalism without any institution, any collective institution such as a state or any other social institution that could replace the state. They are not. It's a very, very weird thing. If you've seen what the discourse of Milei is very complex. One of the important things is that this contradicts the previous 15 years of developmentalism, where the state was at the center of the developmental strategy, and now the state appears as the problem. And this is part of the problem we have in Argentina now. After many years of strategies that put the state as the main institution that's going to solve everyone's problems, which it hasn't, and things get increasingly worse, the state appears, rather than a solution of these problems, as the cause of the problem. And Milei fits on this issue. And all of this situation where the economic conditions get worse and worse and worse tend to, with other changes, of course, tend to foster processes of individualization, decollectivization, solitude, and estrangement. People are like getting separated from each other. People are like, this idea of entrepreneurship, individual entrepreneurship has gone very deep into many voters in Argentina. And of course, the role of new technologies, which also tends to separate people from each other. This is something very important. And I used this concept that for 10 years, in Argentina's capitalism, we had like a sort of a class war of attrition as a war against workers to try for capital to try to solve the question of valorization of capitalism that hasn't been working as of now. Argentina is still in crisis, still in recession, still with high inflation, etc. And Milei appears, Javier Milei, which is the new president, appears as the one that's going to radicalize all of this with a different strategy, but in the same direction. This is a picture of, well, that's Milei, that's his sister back there. He uses this idea of I don't remember the name of the machine, to cut down, what? The chainsaw machine, to cut down the state in like that. And he's doing that for 6 months now. He's been cutting down parts of the state, like literally, like disappearing areas, complete areas of the state. Ministries, firing, they have fired more than 60,000 people in the state, which is like 20% of the people that work for the state have been laid off. And the idea of them is like to continue with that throughout the years. So we're having a bit of a problem, I think. It's a crazy man. Well, behind of this, in front of all of this, of course, I like to put the idea that this is, of course, this is all very bad, but there are lots of resistances in different places. Some of them are small because there are small populations, small populations for example, in the places where lithium is being extracted. Some of them are bigger. Some of them include population organizations from the cities, from urban settings. Some of them include populations of people from other places. There is a combination of resistances that it hasn't been enough, I think, and it's obvious that it hasn't been enough, but we need to continue working on that. And the last thing, that many, this is something that I said before, but it's important to me, that radical transformations have to come, will come eventually, from this articulation of political alternatives in the grassroots. It's impossible for these solutions to come from the top, from the state, for example. And the idea of a popular economy is very important in Argentina. For the last 10 years, it has been used in replacement of, or in parallel with, the idea of the informal economy. But popular economy has a more political connotation, because it implies that people in these areas of the economy trying to organize to solve them between themselves the problem that they face. For example, soup kitchens, as they call them in the States, in the United States, places where people can go in their neighborhoods to eat if they don't have enough money, but people organize these things from the bottom up. And these are important issues relating to the way to build alternatives to this situation. As I said before, and this is all the last few slides, as I said before, the question is, where do we get the theory from? Where do we get the main concepts? And we get the main concepts, in my view, from analyzing and from working with the movements that are struggling to change things. And there's the movements of the unemployed in Argentina many years ago. Now the movements of the precarious workers, the movements in the popular economy, but also in Brazil, the movements of homeless, the movements of the peasants. The Zapatistas, of course, have provided us with many ideas of how to engage in the needs for transformation, the feminist and women's movements, of course, and eco-territorial movements too, and of course, the traditional, our old friends, the unions, which are in a different frequency sometimes, but we need to engage with them because, I mean, I'm also a unionist activist, I guess, in where I work, but it's part of the thing that we have to do. These struggles have to be connected, and we cannot do all of this without the unions, as we cannot do any of this without the other movements. These are a lot of images of these movements and ideas. And this is important, because these are phrases that come from these movements that show us some of the ideas that we need to use in this building of an alternative. The idea that water is life is an idea that movements around discussing the extraction of lithium, the extraction of gas and oil are put in at the center, because these processes extract a lot of water, use a lot of water in places where water is needed. The land is for those who work it. For everyone, everything. We want everything. This connects what Zapatistas are saying with the struggles in the 70s and 60s in Italy were saying. The phrase from the idea from the Piquetero movement, the movement of the unemployed in Argentina in the 2000s, work, dignity, and social change, which is also something important to understand what people are demanding and people are trying to do. The women's strikes demand, if our life doesn't have value, then work without us and see what happens. Almost the last one, the one from the Chilean Revolution in the 70s, luchar, fight, create popular power. And of course, this is something that we always have to account for, the idea that the Zapatistas had put forth, the idea that we have to walk at the pace of the slowest one. It's a contradictory movement. It's not easy to find the ways, but we need to engage. If we want to engage the most people, we need to work with that and not go like propose the socialism by ourselves. It doesn't make any sense. We need massive movements to change things. So, well, that's it. So we'll keep on fighting until we are all free, and thank you very much. And this is a picture of the Piquetero movement.